Great. Well, so excited to welcome Todd Haskell, Chief Marketing Officer of Hearst Magazines, to the CMO Series video podcast today. Todd, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Very, very excited to dig in. So I'm going to kick off with a nice softball for you. So you sit across an organization as CMO that is catering to car fanatics, health and wellness lovers, beauty lovers, people who are obsessed with their homes. I mean, so much must have changed in the past year for you and for your readers and for your team. How do you as CMO stay in touch with what's most important and happening in culture?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, and I think it's something that we're sort of obsessed with, because across the organization, understanding what is going on with our consumers, with the readers, is just central to everything that we do. So, thankfully, as an organization, we have put a lot of effort into giving the entire organization access to what we learn about consumers. So, for example, I mean, we're touching, whatever, a couple 100 million consumers a month just in the US. And so we see an enormous amount in terms of reader behavior, commerce activity, what people are gravitating to, how they're gravitating to that content. So what we've done a lot of is making those insights available to as many people as we can on the team, making it available to our editorial colleagues to inform creative decision making, making that available to our sales and marketing teams so they can come up with ideas for our advertising clients that will perform really well. So like literally, I mean, I can't tell you how many different dashboards and tools and things of this sort that I look at. But I think, the main thing that probably encapsulates it is this idea of democratizing data, um, and making data accessible and easy for people with really different sort of mindsets to access. Because, if I think about it a few years ago, like, you used to call up a data analyst, if you had a question and you were
Right,
interested in
slip a
what
piece
readers
of
were
paper
thinking.
under the door and hope that something comes out, right? It was kind of magical. Yeah.
Exactly. And what we just learned was that if you don't make it super easy for people to get access to data in real time and be able to have that inform their decisions, the people just won't use it. So we've made a lot of investments in tools and AI and machine learning so that all of our people have access that they can do themselves, which we think has just dramatically changed how people inform their own decision making on a day-to-day basis. So I look at that kind of stuff all the time. I just read our content all the time, which I think is also just really, really important for what it is that we do.
Right. And I mean, you're always getting this real-time feedback from your readers about what they care about. So integrating that. I mean, one thing that I think you said in a past conversation we've had together is you said it really eloquently to data is most powerful when it is most available. But
Right.
what you just said actually went a little further than that. Because you're not only making data available, you're sort of making it so that people can use it themselves as opposed to just get access to it. What was that process like? And was that something that was sort of marketing led and supported by the org? Did it sort of integrate a lot of different teams? Like, how did you, practically speaking, make that happen?
I mean, I think it was an organization-wide initiative, and I think that I give a tremendous amount of credit, for example, to our editorial colleagues, where we have some editors who are brilliant creative thinkers, but they're just historically not comfortable, or many of them, with dealing with the relational databases and things of that sort. And so the attitude that we went into was that let's just make it so that the interface, so that the ability to get data is so much easier. And then what we discovered was people who you would never have imagined were going to be data wonks became some of our biggest consumers. Some of our, most wild, visionary, creative types, all of a sudden were coming to meetings to say, well, I saw this through Hans, which is our AI tool that lets our editors extract information in real time. And they were all of a sudden, they were just making decisions based upon data that they were just pulling themselves because we made it easy. And I think the other thing that was also really in part of the democratization effort is that we just felt that data deserved to be free within the organization. So everything that we do is available to everybody. So everything that happens on Harper's Bazaar is available to the team at Elle, where
Oh,
historically
so
they might have
cross brands.
100%.
Wow.
So cross brands and cross disciplines. So, our advertising and marketing team see everything that's going on within our CMS and our content marketing platform, and vice versa. We want our editors to hear about what it is that is really being successful within our sales and marketing teams, so that it's a valuable input. I mean, our editors are always the decisions they make are based upon what is best for the reader, and
Mm.
that will always be the case. But knowing also what is supporting the enterprise from an advertising perspective is really important input that we want them to have, and that they've been really anxious to better understand.
And so, I mean, that ties into something else which is true about your organization, which is you have a thriving branded content practice that is growing. And I mean, I know we see that ourselves. Is that is the sort of openness across sort of marketing and advertising and editorial, is that one of the things that you attribute for why it's working so well? Like, because I know that in a lot of organizations we see there's just friction, right? Like
Yeah.
there's this sense of branded content doesn't belong in edit and other sorts of stuff. Like how did you sort of make that leap as an
Sure.
organization?
I think one of the things that we felt first of all was that the same standards that we as an organization uphold for ourselves needed to be consistent. So if something was going to be produced on a branded content basis, it needed to be as good as something that we would do on an editorial basis. So as an organization, I think we pride ourselves on a very healthy, collaborative, non-territorial work environment. I think that's something that Hearst, going back to, when Mr. Bennick, as our CEO for many years, that's just a culture that he took great pride in building. And it permeates things like our branded content practice, where our people who are working with our clients on really ambitious branded content are just, incredibly tightly connected to our editorial teams. They're really, part and parcel. They are the same. It's a hive mind. They all work together, so that everything that we're doing on a branded content basis is informed by the successes or failures of what we produce on an editorial basis, and vice versa. And it's been incredibly important for us over the last few years.
And how does that play? I mean, when you're talking with your marketer and advertiser partners, I mean, is that something that's important to them? Or like, how does that sort of differentiate your teams when advertisers are trying to make decisions about
Sure.
who to partner with? Because I know, particularly now with the pandemic, so many marketers are thinking of ways to meaningfully intersect culture and to sort of be there where people are, as opposed to interrupting them and trying to bring them
Mhm.
elsewhere. And it seems like branded content's an important part, but like how does that translate when you're working with marketers?
Yeah, well, I think branded content is also particularly powerful in the context that we operate, which is trusted brands that people have known and have relied upon for years, if not decades. So that but it creates a greater responsibility on our part as well. So when we're producing branded content, we want to make sure that it is truly in the voice of the editorial brand, that it's going that through which it's going to be distributed. Because if we do something that just doesn't feel right for the brand, the reader is they're gonna notice it instantaneously. um, and we also have to look very carefully to say, like, what are things that are appropriate or are not appropriate for our brands. So we take that very seriously. I can tell you, we get requests all the time, to for example, for our health and wellness brands, which are arguably some of the most the deepest sort of trust relationship. A brand like Good Housekeeping with the Good Housekeeping Institute, prevention, women's health, men's health.
Yeah,
um,
particularly in this time, right? With yeah.
Totally. We get requests all the time from products that ask to do branded content that we just won't do it. We think that particularly during the pandemic, the fact that people, and I probably especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we saw huge traffic spikes of people coming to us looking for science-based expert insight into how people needed to process what was going on at the beginning of the pandemic. And that attitude has to permeate everything we do on a branded content basis as well. So we take that very, very seriously.
How much of your approach to sort of marketing your brands was informed by your previous role where you were over on the revenue side? And I know that marketing
Sure.
and sales work very closely. You've sort of explained that, but I guess how did you make that transition, and how much of you sort of still lives in that world of thinking about revenue and sort of balancing that over?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm somewhat of an unusual sort of path to the seat that I sit in now. So I've run sales organizations for years. I ran digital sales for the New York Times for a number of years, and then had responsibilities for the integrated business. And then I've been running digital sales for Hearst for about 7 years. So I think what we wanted to do was think about our marketing practice and how we work with the industry in a way that was really connected to what the industry needs. So, when you're running a sales organization, you're with customers, multiple times a day. You're constantly hearing what works for them, what frustrates them, what they want more of, what they want less of. So when I was asked to take on the CMO role, overseeing both print and digital sort of marketing activities, I was excited about it because I know the joys of what it is to run sales. I know the pain of what it is to run sales, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Um, and I was really excited about trying to think about how we could better service the needs of our clients at a time where they really need it. And I think, particularly, I moved into this role, and then roughly 6 months later, the pandemic hit. And I think,
Surprise!
surprise. But I think it was actually it was liberating in some ways, but it also really crystallized the role that we as an organization can have with these clients, and it really let us do some really cool things that I think that we would not have been able to do if we were all still in the offices the way we were before March 12th of 2020.
Yeah, I think that touches on something that we were discussing, which is, I think you said, innovation by necessity creates opportunities.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that? How did you innovate throughout the pandemic? And you're just in this new role, you're still sort of getting up to speed, and then the world fundamentally changes. How did you break that down from an innovation standpoint?
Sure. So, one of the things that we heard loud and clear at the beginning of the pandemic was that our customers, our agency partners, our client partners, were just were so desperate to better understand what was going on with consumers in the marketplace, and because they knew that people were confused, that people were looking to better understand the world around them. So what we decided to do was, we've always been known for doing interesting research, particularly thought leadership research, but we decided to to approach it during the pandemic in ways that were just very different for us. So, so we started conducting these really ambitious research projects with third-party partners to dive into things that our partners were really looking for, and then also be sort of liberated by the lack of the physical constraints of face-to-face interaction, um, and share this information much more broadly than we used to. So I'll give you an example. Beauty is one of our biggest categories. We've always been very involved with beauty. So we were thinking about some research early on in the pandemic, when obviously the horrendous activities related to the murder of George Floyd occurred, and we started to think about how were people in the beauty industry thinking about social justice, about racial equality, and how are those types of topics affecting people's decision making when it comes to beauty purchases. So what we did was we did a major study in the market. It took a couple of months to do, but then what we did is we then convened what I thought was such an interesting session, which was with the research partner looking at the research. Then we brought in our editorial experts to talk about how this is affecting, how they're covering topics relating to social justice and equality, and how what we're hearing about how people are thinking about things from a trend perspective, like how are they supporting Black-owned businesses, how are they want to talk about things like skin tone and topics that are sort of central to the beauty industry. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people join us for an event. They were then looking for more information after the event, and so I thought it was a really interesting example of where we had data, we distilled the data to insight that we could then share with our clients, and then sharing it really broadly to inform the whole marketplace, and make everyone's in the industry's decision making better, which I thought was a really exciting really exciting activity that we're really proud of.
Right. And I think it really sort of ties back to the theme that you were talking about earlier around trust and sort of going ahead, funding this research, which no one was paying you to do, but going, hey, we think that this is something that our partners are going to need to understand. So we're going to dive into it. Um, However, your approach to innovation didn't stop with thought leadership. You also had to innovate around content creation.
Mhm.
And I guess, I mean, it's all going down. Everyone's suddenly at home. We're figuring all of that out, and your content creators have to keep creating,
Yep.
or want to keep creating rather. What was that process like? Like, how did you collaborate and break that down?
Well, first of all, it was terrifying. Obviously, as an organization, the first and foremost, our number one priority was the health and safety of our employees. So that was sort of that was table stakes. But what was really interesting is that, with that said, our creative teams were just really anxious to get to work, and to service the needs of our readers in new and innovative ways. So, and I think this is another example where this whole process liberated us. So, it's a brand like Delish, which is our big food brand, and it's a massive business for us. It's the biggest food site with purely professionally produced original content in the world. Um, and so when we went into lockdown, the Joe Saltz, who's the editor, was like, I think people are really looking for ways that they can engage with their families around food, and doing it in ways, when kids are home full time, that they can sort of create meaningful engagement between a parent and a child. So she actually started to do a regular show with her son, who's, I don't know, 10 years old, give or take, from her kitchen. And we would never have done that before the pandemic. Well, it ended up being a huge success. Then we further innovated because we started to say, well, we know what the whatever the particular product that's going to be featured this month. Let's get advertisers involved in ways that are true to our values, transparent to the reader, but let's an advertiser participate on this. So we started to do that, and all of a sudden it creates an entirely new business. We did the same thing with brands like Women's Health and Men's Health. It started to do regular, like multiple times a day programming for remote workouts with the trainers that we have access to. It at the end of the day, it delighted the reader, and it helped us strengthen that relationship between our brands and the reader, and helped us inject an advertiser into that relationship. And the last thing was, I think what we also saw was that readers found it to be just super authentic. Like, all of a sudden the big photo shoots that we were doing, for example,
With a
with
big crew.
celebrities,
Yeah.
where it was like it used to be, it would be like a Cecil B. DeMille production. It was like, huge numbers of people and craft services and all the rest. And
Right.
all of a sudden we started to do photo shoots with top talent, and it was a photographer at somebody's house shooting them, in ways that were just super intimate. And it worked really well, and arguably it worked even better than what we used to do. So, there's so much that we've learned from this experience that we're going to continue.
Yeah, well, and that I think that touches on where I was going to go next, which is, it's too early, of course. We're not through this by any measure. But we can see light ahead and a way forward. What of this that your team has learned do you think you will persist with beyond, beyond the level of necessity where we are right now? Like, what are some of the great finds that you think you'll continue on with?
Sure. Well, I do think definitely that the intimacy that we sort of experienced when we first started to have to limit like the number of people that are at shoots and at things of that sort, it will definitely continue. And I do think, does it cost less to do that? Yes. But what that also lets us do is it creates a very different dynamic that we have with talent, with our partners, and I think it just overall creates a really healthy environment for us to collaborate on, and we want to make sure that we continue that. I think the other thing, a couple other things, I think that insight-based decision making, that when things were moving incredibly rapidly, it became obviously hugely important. But I think that is a discipline that we're not by any means ever going to walk away from. And then I think the other thing that we just also see is that that time is our ultimate valuable commodity. That the idea of walking into a customer, whether it's an agency or a client, and having the hour-long sort of dog and pony show, it went
After
away
the
because
5.5 hour flight and the thing at
exactly.
the airport, yeah.
Exactly. So I think, it's that I think it really distilled upon us that what people are looking for are are actionable ideas that they can, understand very quickly. That just time is so important, and that we as an organization need to continue to respect that, probably in ways that we did not entirely understand before this.
Yeah, that ties a lot to some other conversations we've been having in this series around how much of the process around some of this, and I think most of these conversations were in the context of film and really big commercials and big scale TV productions, like how much of that was sort of romance and ceremony as opposed to things that you actually needed to have. And I think I think no one knows exactly, but I think the consensus across all the conversations is, gosh, we can get by with a lot less than we thought, and we can sort of just get down to it much faster and sort of skip a lot of the ceremonial pieces that were kind of the window dressing, if you will.
I totally agree, but I also think you can't discount the fact that of how smart the consumer has gotten about some of these things. So I'll give you an example. what we saw during the pandemic was that our readers and our viewers developed an even stronger relationship with our our in-house talent, some of our editors and the talent that appear in our videos. And so we have an editor on one of our food products, June, who started to do these shoots from her kitchen. Now she has a tiny little kitchen. I think she lives in Queens, maybe Astoria.
Yeah.
um, and she does these amazing videos. But what was really interesting is the fact that, like, she looks like one of our readers. She
Yeah.
acts like our readers. She lives in a house with a kitchen like
Yeah.
our readers.
And she's working in a space that is accessible, right? Like oftentimes
Correct.
you're like, gosh, my kitchen doesn't look like that, right?
Right.
It's, I can't do a waltz in my kitchen. It's not possible,
That is exactly so I think that you know that readers and viewers have figured that out now. And
Mhm.
I think that's something that I think is really valuable for everyone, because we probably would have historically put her in some big ass kitchen with
Right.
a marble slab the size of a king size bed
That
in the
was
middle
perfect.
island,
No scratches.
right. And now it's like we shoot in her kitchen, and it's amazing. And I think that's a real treasure.
Was that something, you guys have been around, you're not a new magazine brand, right? And that's part of what I'm sure builds the consumer trust. But was that harder for you, as such an established brand, to sort of break down some of these barriers and, go rogue, as it were, and really sort of like, what was that process like? Or was it just supernatural because you were focused on your readers?
I think it was probably the fact that our it was easy to do, but we didn't know if it was going to be accepted by all of, like, the different constituencies that we work with. So whether it was, would advertisers still value something that was shot, in somebody's kitchen as much as if we
Right.
were
And
doing it
still
in
want
some
to
big
pay, and
studio
yeah.
set or whatever. But I also think, the concern was, speaking for my colleagues on the editorial side, was like, well, if you're talking to top tier talent, they're used to, like, the entourage showing up for the
Right.
shoot. Like, are they going to be upset that it isn't? What we learned is that, like, they didn't care. If
Yeah.
anything, it was liberating. We still work really hard. I mean, what it requires is more pre-planning, and coordination beforehand, so that when you're going very often to, like, somebody's house to shoot, that the work that the stylist has done, the work that everyone else has done beforehand, has to be really, really thought through. But I think people have really embraced it, and I
Yeah.
think on all sides.
Well, and I think, the nice point was there was a period where it was like that or nothing, right? It wasn't like you could go, okay, I'll wheel in the big crew if you don't like it, right? So it was a great time to try things out. So talking, I guess, back over your career, and you've got this intriguing role in maybe one of the most interesting times in memorable history. As you reflect back on your career, what have been some of the most influential decisions? Or, what about the most influential
Mhm.
decision that you think you've made that has sort of gotten you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, uh, I think that, you know, any of us in our careers are put in places where, or asked to do things that you question, like, am I up to this? Do I have the requisite skills to be successful, in this particular environment? And what I found is, those times when you are uncomfortable are often the times when, there's the opportunity for growth, that's the greatest growth. So, for example, so, as I mentioned, I was at the New York Times for a number of years, and I was running a number of marketing and business development functions, organizational issues, things of that sort. And then the boss, who I had great respect for, asked me to run sales for nytimes.com. And I'm like, what? Like, why would you possibly think that I could do that? and it was super frightening. But I think, what she said was, listen, you build new muscles by working muscles that you have not traditionally used. She felt that the experiences I had had leading up to that point would prepare me for that. And then she said, that's how you're gonna grow as a leader, which is to push your own personal envelope into things that you're not particularly comfortable with. So that move that I made, what was it, 15 some odd years ago? I'll not talk the exact year. You don't want to date myself. But I think that, and I think it's the same when I moved into the CMO seat a couple of years ago. I've spent 15 years leading sales teams, and now I was asked to move into a CMO role, which was, also sort of intimidating. Um,
It's a big
but
move over, yeah.
but that is where growth happens, is when you do feel, when you do question yourself, do I have everything that I need to be successful in this? And I think for any of us, it creates greater motivation to dive in really quickly.
How do you, I know one of the things that I've heard many people grapple with is like, how do you know when it's a good challenge, right? Are all challenges good challenges, or like, how do you personally discern, like, gosh, this is outside of my comfort zone. I feel pretty uncomfortable, but you know what, I'm going to do it, versus like, whoa, there's just no way, this is a bad move. How do you tell the difference between those?
You know, I, I think it's probably different for everybody. I will tell you from my personal perspective, there's a couple things. Number one is that you have to take pride in what the work that you're doing is all about. So, I've worked in publishing for media brands for over 30 years now, and personally, it's always been incredibly rewarding to be supporting the journalistic work that makes a difference in millions of people's lives. And whether that's for a brand like Women's Health or Cosmopolitan or Esquire, I mean, these, they help shape people's understanding of the world. That these brands help people better understand what's going on, some of which might be sort of entertaining versus health and wellness, but still they play a really important role in people's lives. So that's always been really important to me. So I think that is something going to be rewarding to you on a visceral level. I always joke, I get approached by ad tech companies and things of that sort over the years. I've just never been interested because I really so enjoy supporting the journalism that I think is so important for us as a country. I think the other thing that's also really important is the values that an organization shares. So, whether it was when I was joining the New York Times or when I joined Hearst, talking to people, like, Michael Clinton and David Carey and Steve Schwartz, it was very clear what the values that they held really close. And that was so important to me, in why I accepted the role, and why I'm still here all these years later, which is that you just need to make sure that the values of the organization, the values of the people who you'll be working with, align with your own personal values.
Have you, you talked about being like sort of supporting journalistic work for many years. Have you ever been tempted just to jump in and do the writing yourself, like you?
It's really funny. So
Is that
Kate
what's
Lewis,
next?
Kate Lewis, who is our chief content officer, I always joke because I'm like, I definitely consider myself a frustrated journalist. I've worked in journalism adjacent for
Yeah.
my entire career, but they've never actually let me touch the pretty pictures or words. But I do think that one of the things that has helped me be successful throughout my career is understanding that, um, and being able to work really effectively with our editors, that ultimately the way I look at things from an advertising and marketing perspective is, if it is right for the consumer, if it's right for the reader or the viewer, that ultimately that's what's going to result in something being successful. That if you think about that, the reader first, and put everything through the prism to say, is this something that is going to speak to a need for the reader, is going to deliver upon something that they will value, that's what's going to work for the advertiser. So ultimately, I consider myself to be part of the journalistic enterprise every day. I just do it in my own unique way.
And you haven't dived in to actually ship the content quite yet, but
No, and I
maybe
don't think I'm that
maybe.
smart or talented to do it. So that's probably why.
That's amazing. So when you think about, continuing on this reflection on your career, what is the one thing that you now know that you really wish you would have known at the start or early in your career?
Well, it's remember, so I started my career, before there was an internet. So, a lot has changed. But I do think the thing that I always tell people who are early in their career is to think about, not your next job that you might be considering, but what is the trajectory that job is going to put you on after that, or maybe even after that. So think about not where you're going to get, oh, well, this might be, I might make 15% more money if I go to this role. You really need to think about 2 or 3 steps beyond that to say, what is it that is the long-term goals, and I got really good advice very early on in my career by my very first boss, guy named John Laughlin, who encouraged me to take on a sales role very early on in my career. And he said, you might not want to do that for your entire career, but you want to get the experience now so that 20 years from now, you can reflect on what you learned as a salesperson, and be better at whatever it is that you want to do. So I think that the thing that is thinking about one's career as sort of a portfolio of experiences, not just about one job, but about this job, and this job, to build a diversity of skills and muscles, if you will, is just so important, particularly now when the marketplace changes so often. You need to be able to adapt really quickly, and having a diversity of experiences is the best way to do that.
Yeah, I love that phrasing around a portfolio, because it's almost like something that you amass and something that becomes more valuable over time grouped. I think so much of the pressure that people feel early on in their career is like making the right decision, right? Like, this is the be all and end all. Is this the job that is going to make my career and make me happy? And it's great to have that long range perspective.
And I think the other thing is that perspective is not, you know, is available to people even if they elect to stay in the same organization. So people often think it's like, well, I need to quit, in order to advance my career and go to the next company, the next company. Um, I think that one thing I always also really encourage people early in their career to do is really take advantage of the networking within any given organization. Obviously do what you need to do to be successful in the role that you're in today, but invite people to have coffee, well, when we're able to have coffee again, although you could do it over Zoom. But network within the organization, learn what people are doing in their unique role so that you can learn from it, because the best way to build that portfolio of skills is to do it in an organization that knows you and you know them, so that you can go into roles that are rewarding for both the organization and you, the employee, and that's the best way to build up a real diversity of skills.
Yeah, and it's terrific advice, because I think so many people worry that they just need to stay under their manager. They shouldn't meet with other people. They don't want that to be perceived. And I think this is great advice, particularly as everyone's working from home and you can't just bump into someone at the coffee machine. It's like, how do you actually navigate, become more visible, learn more about what other people are doing?
Absolutely.
So a couple of just quick rapid fire. What is the role of social media for Hearst magazines?
Well, it is central to what we do. But I think, it's so important to us because it's very often the way that people interact with our brands. In either at the beginning of their experience or throughout the experience. So, a brand like Cosmopolitan, we have the footprint that that brand has across all of the different social media platforms is just so remarkable. Um, but I think what's also exciting is that it's such an opportunity for innovation and for experimentation. I mean, I was, working on the brand when we first got involved with Snapchat, and the idea was that it was sort of a uniquely appropriate brand for that environment, and it has been. It's been a huge success there. But now we're looking at the next things. We're looking at, obviously, we're deep into TikTok. We're deep
Oh, yeah.
into live streaming and commerce. My colleague Nancy Berger, who runs that brand, has been so successful in pushing that brand with her editorial partners in ways that like we never would have imagined. So I think that it's so important that we look at social media as a resource for continuous experimentation and innovation. And by the way, some of which will fail. And that's perfectly okay. But we just need to continue to push the envelope and try new things on a regular basis.
Yeah, and talking about failure in that way, Todd, is also so important because I think so many brands hold back until there is the best practices playbook. Like by the time the playbook is completely written and printed and bound, it's too late, right? Like you've missed a lot of, you can still get on and get value, but you've missed so much of that early energy of, a platform like TikTok right now that is still largely shaping, from a brand perspective. Um,
Absolutely.
if you were to explain your role as CMO to, someone who I guess wasn't deeply in our industry, how would you define what it is that you do as the chief marketing officer?
Sure. So I think, well, every organization probably defines it a little differently, but I'll tell you how I look at my role as, first of all, is just helping other people succeed, and do the best possible job they can. How can I remove barriers to success for the broader organization? So, um, you know, overall, my job is to make sure that we are positioned in the marketplace in ways that are going to help us be most successful in building our business. So how we work with advertisers, how we work with partners, how we're positioned, how we communicate with the market, how we educate and inform the market, and overall what our external communication is, and then also how we best equip our sales teams with the best possible creative ideas that they can take out to the market. So that's how I work. So I work with a corporate marketing team that works across the umbrella of all of our brands, but then I work really closely with our various integrated marketing teams that are brand specific. I work with our corporate communications team. I work with our data studio. So much of what today's successful CMO is, the role is about leading through influence. It's about harnessing the collective energy of an organization. Some people who might work for you, but most who don't, all to support the sales enterprise in ways that are going to be consistent with what the organization is about.
Oh, I love that. And what's the next mountain to climb for you? Like, what are you excited about as you look out through the remainder of this year and into the future?
Sure. I think it's a couple things. Number one, um, I think that the role, as we all know, with the changes in sort of the data landscape, the degradation of the third-party cookie, things of that sort that we're all obsessed with right now. Um, I think that the role of the high quality content provider is just, there's a huge opportunity for us. We collect billions of pieces of information a month on the readers that we have a direct one-to-one relationship with. So I think that how we work with our advertising partners over the next couple of years is just super exciting, and is going to be just really intriguing to me. I think the other part of it is also the idea of how historically there was commerce and there was advertising, and they were very different things. That is just utterly going away. So I think that the opportunity for us to work with partners in ways that historically we were not capable of doing, but leveraging the ability of our brands to drive business results, to drive transactions, but doing that in ways that are directly connected to upper funnel or in mid funnel brand building and brand awareness approaches, I think is also just really exciting. So I think those are two of the things that I'm most excited about as we move forward.
No, I love that. I think there's so much conversation about how you used to have this divide between a brand marketer and sort of a lower funnel direct marketer. And everyone's going, gosh, that's just not a realistic, bifurcation of a marketer's role. So that it sounds like you're well positioned to be to be threading the needle around that as well.
We hope so.
Amazing. Well, I could talk to you forever, but I'll hold us here. Todd, thank you so much for joining for today's episode. It was so great to talk to you, and we can't wait to chat again soon.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.